special time 6 p.m. to 7:30, the special session on urban transport. And as you know, the Foundation for Economic Growth is a policy-oriented research foundation which believes in research-based policy advice. We have started this series of seminars on contemporary issues which are concerning India and are concerning the policymaker. It is in this context that we have today a panel on such an important topic. To have a discussion on such an important topic in our country is not very easy. So we requested my old friend and colleague, Dr. O.P. Agarwal, to help us in putting up this panel. And I'm so excited that now we have a perfect panel to talk about this issue in our country. While Dr. O.P. Agarwal will be chairing the session, I have the proud privilege of introducing the panel today. The panel, of course, will be chaired by Dr. O.P. Agarwal, whom, as I know and known him for long now, he was with me, a colleague at the World Bank. And before that, he was from the civil services. I would say, looking at his short bio, for nearly 2 decades, he has worked on urban transport and varied experience in India and abroad. And while he was at the World Bank, he was the advisor on global urban transport. So he brings with him that rich experience of the topic at hand. Our second panelist is Professor Geetam Tiwari. Geetam Tiwari is a professor at IIT Delhi, and she's also the Ministry of Urban Affairs Chair Professor for Transport Planning in the Civil Engineering Department. She has worked in the area of traffic and transport planning and traffic safety, focusing on pedestrians, bicycles, and bus systems. She is also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal on Injury Control and Safety Promotion since 2009. We are also joined by Mr. Laghu Prashar. Laghu Prashar is with GIZ. He is a transportation planner and having more than 16 years of experience in planning, design, and implementation of sustainable transportation projects. He has led teams delivering various sustainable transport projects, including bus rapid transit system, I think, which is of great interest to many of us. And why didn't it succeed in Delhi? How is it doing better in other places? And in some places doing exceedingly well. And then he has authored a couple of papers and publications and various reports. And I think the best one I would think is the cost of urban commute and waiting for a bus. He has been honorary secretary of Institute of Urban Transport, India, and active as a visiting faculty in leading planning institutions. Our final panelist for today is Ms. Sarika Chakrabarti. She is an architect and urban planner, again with about a decade and a half of years of cross-sectoral experience in projects related to planning. Currently, she is working as a senior coordinator for the master plan for Delhi 2041. And that's very important for us because EGROW right now is working for India 2046-47. So it's very important that we have somebody working for a Delhi plan for 2041 at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which is widely recognized as a think tank for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. She has recently led a team of planners to develop a baseline and sectoral strategies for the transport and housing sector for the master plan for Delhi 2041. So I'm so happy that we have been successfully to invite these 4 panelists, each one of them an expert in their area and very useful to us, because while we are in the middle of this exercise of looking at India in 2046-47, I think the inputs which we gathered today are going to give us some guidance in preparing our project for NITI Aayog. So I must thank Dr. O.P. Agrawal to have requested, guided us, and put the team together. With this, I'd now like to invite Dr. Agrawal to chair the session and conduct the proceedings, please. Dr. Agrawal, please.
Thanks very much, Charan. Thanks for all that introduction. But let me pick it up from there and sort of do a little introduction of the panelists the way I see them also. Professor Geetam Tiwari has been my teacher. There's a lot that I have learned from her. So there is very little that I know that she doesn't already know. And, by far one of the best teachers I've ever had, that is Geetam. Laghu has been one of the brightest youngsters I have come across. I've known Laghu now for almost 20 years, but one of the brightest youngsters, a thinking person. I've always been amazed by his ability to think ahead. Sarika, as you mentioned, Sarika led the urban transport or the transport part of the work of the Delhi master plan, which is today under discussion. And I think this is one of the few master plans that has included a strong component of transport. Otherwise, transport in master plans generally is seen as roads and nothing beyond that. But the Delhi master plan is unique in the sense that it has included much more in transport as part of its the planning effort, and Sarika led that part of it. So thanks, Charan, for giving me this opportunity to talk on a bring together a panel on a topic that is very close to my heart. What I'm planning to do is divide this whole discussion into three parts. Let's say we'll start the first part, focus much more on urban mobility issues. We'll spend a large part of the time on urban mobility issues because that is really what is becoming extremely important in the country. But not to forget intercity transport as well. So we want to spend some time on intercity transport and see if we can have a discussion, what are thoughts and views about this. And the third part, we'll look at some questions, some discussion involving participants. We have about 45 participants by now. I think more will join as we go along, but look at some kind of a discussion with participants coming in. So with that, let me start with the first part. Indian cities are growing rapidly. We have about 370 million people in urban areas, according to the 2011 census. By 2050, the expectation is that they will go to over 800 million people in urban areas. India is going to have about this, the largest growth in urban population is going to happen in India. So this is a huge urbanization challenge. When you look at data from the UN urban population projections, you see that Delhi is growing very rapidly. In about the next 5 to 10 years, some of the biggest cities in the world will be in India. Delhi is slated to overtake Tokyo in the next 5 to 7 years and become the world's largest urban agglomeration. So that is the degree of importance that you see in cities. And if India is looking at, a rapid growth in its economy, there have been ambitions articulated of becoming a $5 trillion economy and a $10 trillion economy from roughly about $2.75 trillion economy. Most of this growth will happen in cities. And cities must not only be able to accommodate this growth, but in fact enable this growth. And for that to happen, transport systems are going to be fundamental. Whether goods are able to move around, people are able to move around, that is going to be fundamental to cities being the engines of economic growth going forward. That's why this is a topic which is very close to my heart, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion around this. But just to set a little context on what is happening on urban mobility. One, we are seeing developments in information technology getting integrated into urban mobility systems, which are enabling much more integration between different modes than we've ever had in the past. The kind of things you are seeing with shared mobility options, whether it is the Ubers, the Olas, the shuttles, so many other forms of shared mobility that we are seeing emerging, not just in India, all over the world, is really enabled because of developments in IT having come in. Europe is talking about something called mobility as a service, which through a single platform is bringing together multiple modes of transport. Now, all of this is really obviating the need for personal motor vehicle ownership. Something which all this while we thought that good public transport would help people shift to public transport. I mean, good public transport will help people shift away from personal motor vehicles. Today, a competitor to public transport is emerging in the form of shared mobility options. Now, whether this is good or bad, let's see what the discussion tells us. The second big change that we are seeing is a move away from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. Now, electric vehicles are not just cleaner, but electric vehicles make economic sense when you use them for longer distances in a day. And this is where shared mobility options, where vehicles travel much more than personal vehicles, make economic sense if they move to electric. So electric mobility is going to make certain changes in mobility patterns also. There is, of course, developments taking place in autonomous vehicles, which I think in India may still be a little way off. But at some point, autonomous vehicles will come into India. What happens when autonomous vehicles become big time coming here? You don't have drivers. Vehicles may be able to move faster without a driver. They may be able to move much closer to each other. Road capacities may go up. I mean, these are some of the thoughts that are coming around autonomous vehicles. The third big thing that has happened is COVID. How has COVID impacted mobility patterns? One, a lot more people are today working from home. They're working remotely. This kind of an event would have happened face to face if it wasn't for the kind of technology platforms that have suddenly come up with COVID having come. A lot more people have started shopping online instead of going and buying things themselves. So it is creating changes to how people are moving around. So COVID has had its impact. How long these impacts will last? Are they temporary? Are they going to become more permanent? What is the outlook on some of these things? What COVID has also done is created a bit of a fear about public transport. People are beginning to wonder whether the concentration that you have in public transport is that safe for me. And some recent data that we've seen is that the sale of second-hand small cars seems to be going up. Perhaps an indication from that some people who are using public transport are worried about it, trying to buy second-hand vehicles as a temporary measure to shift till things become better. Now, will that create a more permanent change, or is that likely to be very temporary? So these are, I think, some of the critical things that are creating some kind of uncertainty of what the future of urban mobility will look like. And this is the question I would have for the panel. Where do you see urban mobility going with this background? What kind of travel patterns do you think will sustain? Do you think some of these changes will be long-term? Will some of them be short-term? Let me pose this as the question to the panel. And can I start with Geetam, then go to Laghu? And then when I go to Sarika, you can tell us what was your thinking when you were putting all this into the Delhi Master Plan. So take 5 to 7 minutes, take your time on that, but your thoughts. Geetam, over to you. You're on mute, I think.
Oh,
you're on mute.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much for that very nice introduction. The Teachers' Day was already gone, but anyway, you always send these messages around Teachers' Day and otherwise also. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to have, I would say, I have learned many things from you as well. So to answer your question, where is future urban mobility headed? I think we have to see whatever three trends that you have described. Electric mobility, something which is happening on autonomous vehicles, impact of COVID, But I want to first highlight a very simple fundamental principle that our travel behavior is a reflection of the kind of infrastructure, both hard and soft, which is around us. It is not independent of what is around us. We don't decide to use autonomous vehicles because it's becoming very good, but we can stop walking, because when we step out of our house, we find the environment is very hostile. And yet many people continue to walk because they have no other choice. So people with choices, which is what we expect in future, their decisions in terms of how to travel and where to travel is dependent on what kind of environment as policymakers we create. That is very fundamental thing to understand. So if the roads become congested for cars, the information we get, empirical information that we get, is that is when people stop thinking about other modes. But if continuously we try to solve the problem of congestion for cars, whether it is autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles, doesn't matter. It is still a personal car. More and more people will use it. And in 21st century, we have new constraints, which we did not understand in last century, which is global warming, CO2. Even if we can address it through technology, what about the adverse health impacts of transport? Safety, and more than safety, lack of active transport. You see, there is a lot of data coming out from motorized countries now, where if we see that is where our future is headed to, that countries and societies which are dependent on motorized traffic are facing all kinds of health issues, of obesity, of cerebrovascular diseases, so a list of diseases you can connect to poor or a lack of walking, bicycling, using public transport. This constraint we have to understand. So if we are looking for future sustainable mobility, no matter which technology we look at, if we are trying to achieve sustainability, we cannot forget creating safe environment for walking and bicycling and public transport. Now, coming to the last aspect that you mentioned about COVID and what kind of impact it has had on use of public transport, I think that also reflects the way public authorities have responded to COVID and public transport. Because this was actually a good opportunity to create, really give priority to public transport in terms of improving quality, improving frequency, improving the inside condition of the public transport. And you know that many countries have done that. During all the COVID period, public transport services were not stopped. Whereas many other countries went ahead and stopped metro systems and reduced the bus usage, bus frequencies. So that has also impacted the use of these services. It is not only the fear of getting into the crowded conditions. Crowded conditions could be avoided if we have better service, if we have more buses. So that part is also, I think, partly reflecting public authorities' response to providing to providing public transport, which is, I should say, COVID compliance. We have not done that very well. So I would like to sum up this. Remember that our travel decisions are based on public responses, how we design a public transport, or how we design our roads and how we design our land use patterns. It is a response of that. Whether we talk about electric mobility or shared mobility or autonomous vehicles, this fundamental principle does not change. So even if we have advances in autonomous vehicles and we can think it's become very safe, if we have advances in electric mobility and we can solve the local pollution problem, and perhaps in future we have clean electricity so we can solve CO2 problem, yet it does not solve the adverse health impact. So this is what we have to keep in mind while achieving, I think, what a vision of sustainable mobility is. For me, fundamental is to create, I think in this forum, there are a lot of senior citizens. Please ask yourself, when you step out, do you feel comfortable in crossing the road as a pedestrian, as an old person? Do you think the environment is such that you may have a car, but you choose not to use a car, but a public transport or walk? If you can answer that question positively, that should be our vision for future. I'd like to stop here. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Geetam. I think you've said a very important point that people's travel behavior depends on the kind of infrastructure that is available for mobility. So when I move to Laghu, let me sort of add a little bit to this, that when we design the infrastructure for mobility in cities, would we also take into account what is the likely changes in mobility patterns that we may see? And what do you think are the likely changes? Will they remain the same, or do you expect some changes so that governments can take note of these changes and design infrastructure on those lines? And what do you see would be those kinds of possible changes? Laghu, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir, and thanks for EGROW Foundation for inviting me. It's a great feeling to join the panel with Upi sir and Professor Tiwari and my colleague Sarika. Yeah, I hope I will be able to do justice with the discussion. Yeah, so coming back to the questions which Upi sir has raised, if I may take the first part, which always fascinates me, is like the COVID impact. Okay, and I have been observing this trend from last 2 years, and when this all circumstances started, how basically how COVID has worked like a biggest disruptor around us. And when I say disruptor, it disrupted everything: the way we eat, the way we live, and the way we travel. Okay, it left nothing actually around us, around our lifestyle. So how it worked like a disruption. Okay, and when we talk about the disruption always come up with the opportunity to innovate, and it always come up with a in terms of negative impact and positive impact. And it is up to us, how do we arrest the positive changes and how do we mitigate the negative changes, and which apparently the COVID has shown us in last couple of years. Now, what are those positive and negative changes, and where I personally could see the traction at the policy level also observing and acknowledging those changes. Of course, traction could be at a larger scale, but yes, things have started coming, which is fascinating to see. And there are things which are not so fascinating to see, which we can also discuss. So let's start with the positive impact in the travel behavior, what we have seen. OPSR talks about the work from home and the flexi timing. As a planner, we would always like to avoid need for travel. Okay, we can, without compromising the productivity of our work, if without travel, if we can do that, that it has no replacement as far as any mode, any fuel type or anything is concerned, which we have seen in a short period of time, how quickly a particular job and occupation probably have adopted the flexi timings of work from home. Digital trips, physical trips have been replaced by the digital trips. Okay, somehow the Zoom calls, Teams call, and WebEx have become like a transit mode, invisible transit mode, which are not added to the congestion. Okay, and this particular forum is a classical example. If not the COVID, probably all of us must be meeting in a conference room and making multiple trips in a hotel. So this is a classical example how the digital trips are replacing the physical trips and further reducing the congestion on road, which is, again, this is a trend and something which is need to learn. Talking about the mode choice, apparently cycling has come up as an emerging choice in last couple of years. Okay, and this is something as a planners and as a policy maker and a lot of cities we have been trying, okay, to pose and to bring some kind of a traction as far as cycling and pedestrianization is concerned. But it is because of the COVID, there could be a positive traction could be seen as far as cycling is concerned in the various cities. And as a result, as I said, that somewhere it is being acknowledged, okay, that's because the cycling is somehow emerging and city, state, and somewhere at a national level, it is being acknowledged. And a small, maybe a small scale, but that level of infrastructure provisioning has started. If I may say, for bringing such kind of traction, which I have not seen in last 5 years or 10 years in my career, which I could see in last 2 years. And to some extent, credit goes to the COVID, because cities have started realizing the importance of the cycling. National ministries have started realizing, and we have seen such kind of initiatives, Cycle for Change and Street for the People. Some kind of things are happening. Of course, it could be at a greater scale, but it will eventually happen, which is, I would say, the fascinating trends which are coming up out of the COVID. We have seen the migration happening, reverse flow is happening in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Okay. And now the dependency to be in tier 1 city to deliver your productivity, to deliver your job is no longer necessity. Okay. Now it comes up with a two immediate requirement. We need to have a strong digital infrastructure in our tier 2 and tier 3 cities so that productivity cannot be compromised. Again, this tier 2 and tier 3 cities should be linked with the tier 1 city with a faster transportation infrastructure. So all these trends which COVID has shown us need to be somewhere, all those positive trends which COVID has shown us by force, of course, there was no choice but to adopt them. They need to be arrested, okay, for the long-term benefits, okay. At the same time, what we have seen is the negative trend also, which is not so fascinating, is the public transport. Okay, one mode which is maximum impacted because of the COVID is the public transport. Choice riders in the public transport started leaving. So earlier, what used to happen, the cost and the time, travel time and the travel cost used to be in India mostly the two parameter based on which any rider decide its choice, mode choice. Okay, I can afford probably metro, Ola, Uber, but I'm more concerned about the convenience, comfort, and the travel time. I will choose that. I can't afford, but I'm not least concerned about the time, travel time, and the convenience. I will choose probably the bus. Somehow that kind of categorization or subcategorization in the mode has been created over a period of time, that this will give you the less travel time but high cost, but this will give you the high travel time but less cost. Somehow now the third dimension has been added as far as the mode choice is concerned in the transit system, which is the hygiene and the safety. Okay, now those choice data started taking a call based on this third parameter also, which again go back, this trend is going back to the policy maker to rethink about our standards, our supply patterns of the public transport is concerned. We are under supply as far as public transport is concerned. Our standard as far as crowding, the way we design our system need to be relooked at. Okay, people are no longer going to accept those crowding level in the public transport which they are used to properly. So these are both negative and the positive trends which force us as a policymaker to rethink on our standards, our provisioning or the infrastructure. Professor Tiwari talking about that. Now we are seeing the trend. Now we need to arrest that trend for the long term to providing the more and more infrastructure for the cycling and for the pedestrian. Similarly, for the negative trend which is going in the public transportation need to be stopped. It is not at all arrested. It has to be stopped, and it has to go in the reverse direction by oversupplying and of course match the demand supply gap and providing better services. Okay, and with more hygiene, less crowding inside. So I'll just stop over there because I wanted to set up the context, and this is my overall understanding of the travel pattern change. Thank you.
Thanks, Laghu. Let me now move to Sarika. Sarika, what was on your mind when you were working on the Delhi Master Plan? What were some of the key principal thoughts that were driving what you put into that plan? Over to you, Sarika. You're on mute.
I don't know how I successfully managed to always start speaking on mute. Anyway, good evening, everyone. Thank you, EGROW Foundation, for inviting me, and very interesting questions posed by OP sir. See, when we started drafting the master plan, COVID was already there, so it was a big thing which played on our minds. And of course, the issue of environment, which is always there, and transport being linked to air pollution. And in fact, 90%, there is data which shows that 90% of the pollution, road transport is responsible for that. So all these things were there on our mind. Other thing that was also on our mind was to somehow, achieve equity. There are, through the baseline studies that we conducted, we realized that although Delhi has the sixth largest metro, network in the city and things like that, there were certain corridors, certain routes that we could identify in the Delhi metro, for instance, the red line and the green line, which have high density settlements around them, but still the ridership is very low. So one obvious thing which comes to our mind is perhaps Delhi metro is not affordable for the common masses. So, making it equitable, making it more accessible, spatial strategies. So all these things were there in our mind. Now, Delhi actually presents a case of duality. So, like I said, we have the fifth largest metro network in the country, in the world, in fact, and we have a very well-connected bus system also. I'm not talking about the fleet size. The fleet size has, of course, halved in the last 5-6 years, which is a very worrisome trend. Nevertheless, having this, public transport systems, we also have these IPT modes also, which cater to the first and last mile connectivity. Despite that, from 2005 to 2006, the vehicular population of Delhi has almost doubled. So what is it that despite having so many more choices, such an extensive network of public transport, why is it that the public transport systems are not being able to, attract the crowd, fill the ridership, increase the ridership to what was envisaged? So one thing, and if I'm supposed to like kind of giving just use just one word to describe the issues of public transport in Delhi, that one word would be integration, the lack of integration. So we need institutional integration, we need spatial integration, and we also need operational integration of the modes for the system to efficiently function as one. When I talk about institutional, officer who was involved with us during the baseline also, he was guiding us. So there are almost, he would be knowing that there are almost 26 baseline transport agencies in Delhi, and unfortunately they don't really speak to each other. So that major fundamental principle of integrated planning, that is not at all achieved in Delhi. So that for that, the master plan has proposed certain strategies. Then for spatial, our focus has been on the transit-oriented development policy, which brings the actually the way to integrate land use and transport, and also multimodal integration. Multimodal integration has been proposed through development of multimodal hubs, and also, improving the last mile and first mile connectivity by walking and cycling. There are some things which NPD 2041 has tried to do for the first time, which are like slightly a departure from NPD 2021. One of them is that NPD 2041, it focuses on shared mobility. It does not focus primarily on public transport. It does acknowledge that the IPTs and other modes of transport play a very major role. And that is why we should talk about shared mobility and connectivity between all modes. So even when a person deboards from a public transport, there should be immediate availability of some other mode, maybe an IPT or some other, for the last mile connectivity, and only when the seamless travel experience is provided to the commuter, then that shift that you're talking about in favor of public transport will take place. Another first is that we've always talked about the evils of parking. Everyone is aware of that. But MPD 2041 has advocated for the first time the use of a tool called PTAL, Public Transport Accessibility Level. So this would be a data-driven decision-making tool by virtue of which areas which are close to public transport, any mode of public transport, would be assigned some values, and then there's quite a complex calculation there. So by which their ECS, awarded for each land use, that would be rationalized or reduced based on their accessibility to public transport. Then we also talk about rationalizing fares. Now, for public transport, like Laghu very rightly said, there are three parameters: time, comfort, and affordability. So it depends on whether the commuter is a choice traveler or whether it is or whether that person is a captive rider. So these are the three parameters which will decide that. For captive parameters, it is of course affordability is the first parameter. But for the choice travelers who can afford private modes of transport also, they will also always be looking at the comfort and the time parameter. So for the first time, the master plan talks about also improving the services of public transport. It's not just the availability of public transport, and there are various options for that. Now, this master plan, right now we are receiving objections and suggestions for that. So some of the objection suggestions are like really very interesting. Like there are people, informal vendors, who say that we live in the peripheral areas of the city, and when we have to travel to the main city area, the bus drivers, they do not allow us to board the buses with our, the wear, because they're vendors, they're carrying a lot of luggage, for their whatever activity they're engaging in. So, so this kind of ideas are still coming to us that perhaps we should have special services for these vendors during the peak time, morning peaks and evening peaks, when there could be buses which could allow them to travel with their, all their, the wear that they are selling, or, their, whatever activity. Another thing that master plan focuses on is the active travel part, which is walking and cycling. This is of course very connected to the
Sarika,
COVID.
just one more minute.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. So these are some of the things. Master plan also talks about regeneration of the existing infrastructure, which is the ring rail and also the bus depots. How is it that we can make them more, useful? Now, from the COVID point of view, a couple of things that come to my mind is, first thing is that it provides us an opportunity to actually develop active travel infrastructure. There are people, for them, personal travel space has now become premium. So people don't really want to be in crowded situations. Perhaps that is the reason why there is an apprehension against using of public transport. And although there are studies which show that public transports are safe and all, but this is the psychological fear which is there in the mind of the people. So, and one thing that we can, actually leverage is that almost 32% of our urban trips are short distance trips, less than 5 kilometers. So this is the time which actually provides us an opportune moment to actually develop the active travel infrastructure, walking, cycling, so that people, instead of shifting to the private vehicles, can actually undertake walking and cycling if they are apprehensive about using the public transport modes. I think I would end here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarika. Before moving out of urban transport, let me again go around with just a minute for each of you. The question I have is, let's not talk about what has been happening right or what has been happening wrong, what should happen. I'll request all of you to sort of get on to the crystal ball, or maybe play astrologer, and see what do you see as the pattern of mobility in cities over the next 5 to 10 years. How do you see things changing, if at all? With COVID, with IT facilities, with shared mobility, what do you see as the future? Look ahead. What do you see as that? Take a minute each quickly and give us your thoughts. Let me go the reverse way. Sarika, starting with you.
Sir, it depends on a lot of variables. If we are able to put the public transport in place, which is comfortable, which can compete with the comforts of a private vehicle, then I definitely see a shift towards the public transport. More so because this new generation, what we call as a Gen X, I would say that they are very, very cautious. I mean, so many people in my office, they use public transport. There are youngsters who say that we choose to rent houses close to public transport so that even if we have visitors,
Sarika,
they
very quickly, one minute only. Future. Look at the future. What do you see happening?
Another thing is that perhaps the number of cars will,
what do you see things?
The number of cars will perhaps remain the same. That trend from owning a car to perhaps owning a ride, that will come into play. But nevertheless, that will not impact the congestion on the roads. That would remain the same. So it could go either ways.
Laghu?
I have a little different view since you have given the 5-year horizon. I would say that the trend in increase the ownership of cars, especially the second-hand cars and two-wheeler, will increase. People will continue to avoid the public transportation, especially the choice riders, And I'm little afraid about the metro system, especially because majority of the metro systems have the choice riders. Fortunately, the bus transport doesn't have the choice riders. They will come back definitely. So in next 5 years, I see if no major infrastructure investment is coming, which we can see in 5 years, nothing major investment is coming in the public transportation, the trend will be more and more congestion in the road, and more, unfortunately, more and more investment, municipal investment will get into the road widening and the making the flyover, which is very unfortunate part. But in immediate future, this could be happening. Yeah.
Hitam?
Professor, you're on mute, sir. Professor, you're on mute.
You're on mute again. You're on
Professor,
mute.
I think somebody from that side makes me mute. All right. So I tend to endorse Laghu's view. The current trend, the type of policies and investments we are doing in next 5 years, we will have more congestion. We will have more problems in urban areas. We are not going to solve it. And including what is stated in Delhi Master Plan, I'm not very hopeful at all. I'm not optimistic at all.
Thanks, Geetam. Just to share my thoughts, I tend to sort of go with you in the sense that what I see happening is, given the kind of work patterns, I see much more of localized movement, more of neighborhood movements. And I think that makes a strong case for looking at active transport infrastructure. When we were going to work every day, there was a higher share of long distance movement. But with this work from home, I see, I mean, it won't be the same level of work from home. Probably there will be some amount of going to work as well. But I see a higher share of neighborhood movement. And infrastructure for neighborhood movement really needs to begin. Whether investments in mass transit, which cater more to long distance trips, whether those need to be reviewed is something that I would think needs to be reviewed. But I look at much more neighborhood travel rather than long distance travel. And also my apprehension is, again, what Laghu said, that if we don't think this very carefully, it may translate into fewer trips, but happening through personal motorway. That's the kind of thing that at least I tend to see. I don't know what will happen, but this is getting onto the crystal ball, playing astrologer, thinking a little ahead. A lot of things may be different, but let's see. Now, with this, let me move into the intercity kind of mobility patterns. And this point was brought up very nicely about climate change impacts. That is something really upon us. There's a lot of thinking going on, a lot of action going on around climate-friendly transport systems. We, for many years, have done a bit on renewable energy. On the energy sector, looking at clean energy has been a focus for a few years, and we've been doing well. I'm seeing greater interest in looking at decarbonizing transport. And when it comes to decarbonizing transport, on long distance trips, 2 or 3 things seem to be getting more important. One is using cleaner fuels. Second is a modal shift. How do we move away from road towards rail and maybe marine-based transport systems? But the big challenge with both of them, I mean, shifting to marine or rail, is neither of them offers last mile connectivity. So last mile connectivity still has to be through a road transport mode. But India is unique in the sense that it has 5 different ministries looking at transport. And that lack of, it's the only country I have come across where 5 different ministries look at transport. Even if I leave out urban development, which is only urban transport, you still have 4 different ministries looking at transport fragmented across modes. So the need to bring about integration across modes is, to my mind, going to be very important in transitioning towards rail and inland water transport if you want to look at clean transport. The second is, as far as electric, part of the reason why electric is coming is have clean air. But in long distance traffic, you're looking at clean fuels primarily from a climate perspective. Electric seems a little difficult because of range concerns, But there's a lot to talk about green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is being looked upon as a potential fuel for long-distance freight or even for shipping. So given these kinds of developments, okay, we're also seeing other developments in the form of a rapid rail system coming up, a high-speed rail system coming up, dedicated freight corridors coming up. All of these are perhaps geared towards making rail transport systems more attractive and persuade a shift towards rail transport systems. We are also looking at, thoughts about a hyperloop kind of thing coming up. Now, if you get a hyperloop kind of thing, which is almost the speed of air, but on the ground, what kind of an impact could that have? So with this kind of a little background, again, the question back to you is, what do you see as the future of intercity mobility, passenger freight? Just some thoughts that you may have on this. Let me start with Geetam again and work in the reverse direction.
Okay. Yes, that's an interesting question you pose, OP. So for intercity movement, I think two issues that you have highlighted. One is this climate change concerns and decarbonizing transport. So when we look at decarbonization of transport, it's very important to understand the life cycle costing. It is not about just the changing the fuel, but as you know, that carbon remains, in the atmosphere for a long time. So decarbonization means the construction, the material used, and the fuel used. Each step of transport we have to decarbonize, and therefore we have to have a relook at railway versus roads. It is still possible to have, railways may still win, but we have to see this very carefully. And of course, the source of electricity will play a major role. So sometime in distant future, if we have electricity not coal-based, but other, solar or any other less carbon-intensive source, it is railways would win out. Now, whether people will use it, I think then I would like to integrate it with the second point that you highlighted, that every ministry is doing separately their own thing. So Ministry of Roads and Highways is major investment in highways all across the country, coming up with new green expressways connecting various towns and cities. Whereas High Speed Rail Corporation is doing their own alignments and coming up with plans of doing it. So if both things happen at the same time, I think to me, it seems like that it is more investment driven. It is not driven based on some kind of distant future where we are going to have more decarbonized integrated modes, where we encourage more people to use less carbon intensive mode. So I would say that part becomes very important. Now, whether it is an integrated ministry or some kind of mechanism or institutional structure where this debate can take place. That if on the same corridor we keep doing expressways and we also do high-speed rail and we also do other modes of transport, what exactly are we looking at? Do we have understanding what percentage will travel by road and roads and by high-speed rail or any rail system? I don't see the clarity at all in the current policy documents. So I think for me, these two things would be important for intercity future movement. Consider carefully life cycle costing and based on that, decide which technology to promote and then work out through different mechanisms the share of, and again, just like in urban transport, we talk about integration and at intercity level also at different levels. Infrastructure, operation, and institutions.
Great. So what you would probably mean by this is, can we think of something like a national transportation authority, which sort of integrates the thinking going on across ministries, looks at what is needed and what's the best way of fulfilling that need, rather than just making investments because you need to make those investments.
Right. Yeah.
Something which is a, an umbrella kind of a planning, deciding authority, which then decides what we need at different parts of the country. Let me move to Laghu.
Have a debate and discussion around these issues.
Oh, okay. Great. Laghu, over to you.
Yeah. I think when it comes to intercity transportation, sir, I think coming back to the previous discussion, I would say now the time has come when we need to bring cities and people closer to each other in a least possible time. Okay. We have to provide such kind of a transportation infrastructure where the tier 2 city person from the tier 2 city is connected by the fastest mode with tier 1 cities without burdening the infrastructure, residential infrastructure or other infrastructure of the tier 1 city, and can take a seamless connectivity within the city, in the tier 1 city, and go back in the evening to the tier 2 or tier 3, wherever he's staying. So there is a high level of requirement as far as fast regional connectivity is concerned. Now, when we acknowledge this fact, I tend to agree with Professor Tiwari. I think somewhere when it comes on the fast connectivity or intercity connectivity or regional connectivity, the too much focus is on the highways and expressways. And the reason behind is also, and I could see that there are two ministries, as you talk about. There are primary railway ministry or the other MORTH, which respectively look after the respective modes. They have their own targets to achieve, but nowhere we have a country level targets, which is the national transportation plan. Okay, the railway ministry is developing a national rail plan, and while we have a national highway plans, okay, which are simultaneously targeting some kind of a uh, both targeting in terms of a both in terms of passenger transportation, both in terms of freight transportation, and both has the same pie to cut and to enjoy. Okay, somewhere we need to talk about at a national transportation plan, and what in terms of freight and what in terms of transportation, what in long term rail should cater, and what in long term and short term the expressways and the highways should cater. It is very important. I see, as far as intercity, interstate, or the regional transportation is concerned, I would go in a favor of the high speed rail uh, more. Okay, and this is the time we should have more and more investment as far as high speed rails and semi high speed rails are concerned. Of course, the kind of our grid may not be very clean as of now. We are still 70-30, but the way the country is working towards moving towards the renewable energy, I think we are overachieving the target which we have set up. So I see a bright future as far as that direction is concerned. And but we, as I said, as you also talk about the 5 institutions are working at a national level. We may have a 5 institution, but following the same plan. But where is that plan? That plan has to be their national transportation plan, which talks about, okay, railway should achieve this, and highway should achieve this in future, and all collectively should achieve our international commitment, the national level commitment which we have done, be in terms of SDG, be in terms of INDC, and somewhere which we are lacking in those sense. So this is something which I can highlight. Yeah.
No, good point. I mean, we've had 2 national transport policy committees that were set up, and their recommendations, what we actually see happening is virtually the opposite of what those committees recommended. But those were policy committees. It was not a planning process. And perhaps what you're saying is you need an integrated plan, and individual ministries should implement what that plan contains, not that in each ministry comes up with its own plan. So thanks, Laghu. I think very good point. Sarika, moving to you. I mean, in the master plan, I'm sure you took into account a little bit of the regional planning. You know, Delhi at the center of a very active NCR region. So, were there any thinking around how is Delhi linking up with other cities in the region? Any thoughts on this? What did you have in mind? Or any other thoughts on the other issues that we discussed on intercity mobility? You're on mute again. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
So a lot of thought was given to the intercity transport.
More so because Delhi is the, like you said, the node of the NCR region, and within that NCR region also there are these central NCR towns of Gurgaon, Delhi, Faridabad, and the volume count and the origin destination surveys that we conducted. So there's this huge volume of, the largest is coming from the Gurgaon side, followed by Noida and then Faridabad. So of course some distinct travel patterns emerged, and the master plan in its way has acknowledged this, that there are interdependencies between these towns in terms of housing and in terms of employment. Housing more so because the land costs in Delhi are very prohibitive. So the affordability of owning a house or even renting a house is much harder, much difficult in Delhi. So people choose to live outside and come to Delhi for employment. So that was a general trend that was observed. And with respect to that, the master plan has suggested 3 strategic links. One is towards the north of the northern side of the city, then one is towards the southern peripheral side, and one is towards this this new AIMS, which is coming up outside towards the southwestern side of Delhi. So of course, all this was taken care of. Just taking forward to what Geetam ma'am and Laghu were saying about this national transport plan. I think when we're talking about regionality and about the intercity connection, we also need to scale it down a bit and bring it to a really localized regional thing, like a central NCR region. And that is where authorities like the NCR Planning Board, they come into play. Now, these authorities also have made their transport plans. For instance, I'm sure that you all are aware of that the National Capital Region Planning Board, NCRPB, has made the functional plan 2031. But then how is it that this plan is being implemented, and how is it that the master plan of the individual cities respond to this larger regional plan? So that is something that we have to take care of. And in the future, how I see the intercity transport is that I see the regional scale really shrinking because the cities are going to come closer to each other. So I would not be surprised, because of the RRTS, whenever it gets commissioned, people will start living further away, maybe in Meerut, and then working in Delhi. So that kind of changes in the mobility pattern are something that we are going to see. Coming to your second point about decarbonizing transport, I think every decade there is this new, buzzwords which come up. Presently, it is the EV. But my only word of caution would be that we should not get blindsided by all these emerging technologies. What is missing in India is basically smart planning. Smart technologies and alternate fuels and everything else will then follow. And even when we're talking about, this transition from fossil fuel based transport to, these alternate fuels, there are other things that we have to take care of. For instance, with EV, have we standardized the charging infrastructure? Have we put the charging infrastructure in place throughout the city? Have we thought about the ecosystem for recycling this toxic battery waste which will be generated? So while putting an infrastructure in place, thinking that the carbon emissions would be low, perhaps we should be wary about a larger problem, giving birth to a larger problem if we are not thinking parallelly on other accounts. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarika. That's a very interesting point you brought up. When we start trying to solve one problem, are we creating another problem? When we were looking at faster mobility, we came up with the IC engine. But we never realized that 40, 50 years down the line will create the problem of climate change. So I think similar things on electric vehicles today is still at an early stage. But I think your point is right, that while we move towards electric vehicles, start thinking of future problems it will create and try to, at least think ahead about them and not be caught unaware about them. So, but there's another very interesting point that you brought up, which I think Laghu had also mentioned earlier, this whole issue of reverse migration. You also alluded to that in saying that people from Delhi, if the RRTS comes up, may start moving to Meerut and working there. And there is also, in the chat, there is one very interesting comment on the choice of new self-sufficient urban centers linked by good transport infrastructure to the mother city. So do you see something of this sort happening? That means people moving away into smaller urban centers, and overall there being a regional cluster. Because at the end of the day, a question that comes up is, if you have cities of 30 million and 40 million and 50 million people, you may get economies of scale, but there are management problems. there are carrying capacity problems. Do you think these will start showing up, and this trend of moving a little away with good transport infrastructure, connecting them for the temporary travel needs, how will that show up? Let me again take this quickly, a 1 minute kind of thing from all of you, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. Sarika, you want to start on this?
Yes, sir. I do see that people, this trend of out migration, people living because living in Delhi, while it is of course very convenient because you could be closer to your workplace or something like that, but it does come with other things like we have during the rains we have urban flooding, the quality of housing is deteriorating, so people do prefer to live in perhaps a condo in Gurgaon or maybe Noida, and like I said, they could move further away still. So that is one trend which I think will continue. And this is how, I don't know if this is the correct reference to give, this hub and spoke kind of a thing. That kind of a model will emerge in cities. So yes, I do see that happening. Another idea that just comes to my mind is that people always say that around the transit nodes, the density should be the highest and people, you should have affordable housing and things like that. So if this thing actually plays out, people who can afford it, and if the modes of transport are they're faster, time efficient, so people who can afford it will actually prefer bigger houses outside in the peripheral areas. And because of that, perhaps, I mean, I'm just kind of dreaming big over here, we will be able to create, if not affordable, at least small format houses near the transit oriented areas, and that achieve the densities that are envisaged by this kind of compact land uses.
Thanks, Sarika. Laghu, any comments on that?
Yeah, nothing much to say. I tend to agree with Sarika. I think we have eventually started seeing those trends. People are started. Initially, I used to thought that it's a temporary trend, but apparently that trend has become a little more permanent. Okay, when employers especially started realizing that they no longer need that such a big office infrastructure. They no longer need the headcounts on daily in the office. So they are coming up with a policy. We have seen various companies, various big employers are coming with a policy where they don't need that kind of a big real estate where they used to have. So all of things are getting changed. I think our transportation. So basically, what is transportation? Transportation is it's like it in itself. It does not generate any kind of a demand. Okay, it depends on what is happening around you. What are the travel pattern? What is happening on the commercial land use and residential land use? And apparently, when these things started changing around in the cities, transport system has to adapt automatically. So transport in itself is not an activity. Okay, it depends on the activities around you. Okay, so which is eventually is going to happen. Yeah.
Geetam.
So I think reverse migration is only possible if we invest in small cities, tier 2 cities. We have been talking about Faridabad and Gurgaon, but think about Bulandshahr, think about other small cities around in NCR region, and just go and check out what is their air quality, what is their water infrastructure, what is their transport infrastructure. So this whole thinking that people will travel longer distances if high-speed travel is available and consume more land comes from US, Western cities, where the infrastructure investment is very different. The suburbs, quality of infrastructure in suburban USA in many ways is better than cities. This is what happened in the last century. So today, when we are talking about Indian context, unless the investment goes in improving air quality, water, and other civic infrastructure in the cities, reverse migration is not possible. I think it is still forced migration. Choice migration will not be there. Delhi may be congested, but my access to quality electricity, quality water is much better than Meerut and much better than Gurgaon also. Even transport infrastructure, if you see. So I think it depends on that.
So would you make a case that we should make that investment because this will be a good thing to do? Or would you suggest that we focus on compactness and try to keep the people in Delhi? What would be the right thing to do in your view?
No, see, there are two things. One, you cannot say that we should not focus on improving infrastructure. Of course, that has to be done. That is very much required for the population living there. However, Delhi also, we have to understand, all numbers keeps showing that it's 17 million, 20 million. But the way current Delhi and most Indian cities are, we are cities within cities. There are these several cities compactly packed. And why? Because the number that Sarika also shared, that majority trips are short trips. So that means people who are living for various reasons, because it's mixed land use, because there are other constraints, majority people are not doing long travel. So that part also goes that we have to do that. However, I would say, of course, we have to improve quality of infrastructure in our tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And then we can hope, I don't know whether the correct word is decongest, but we can hope more vibrancy in those cities. Let's put it that way.
Great. I think let's sort of move to the audience and some questions that are already there. So I have Mr. Tuteja who's got his hand up. Anyone else who wants, I would request you to just raise your hand. I'll call on you. But before I go to Mr. Tuteja, can I just pick up one question that is there in the chat box? It's been there for some time. Geetam, I'll target this at you. There is, broadly, this says, how do we improve our adherence to traffic rules and traffic etiquettes? Through your trip program, you would have seen a lot of this. And any thoughts on what can be done? Is it education or is it high penalties? What's the way to handle that?
No, education and high penalty both don't work. That is the empirical evidence. But, something that I mentioned in the beginning, our travel behavior or behavior on the road is again a reflection of what we experience. If as a pedestrian you have to wait for a long time at a red light, then you will violate red light. That is human behavior. Human beings are impatient and we always try to find the shortest path. So in one line, the answer is adherence to traffic rule improves if the infrastructure is according to the needs, not according to the motorized traffic needs.
How well you design your infrastructure can determine, can sort of...
It will solve, let's say, majority of the problem. I would not say 100%, because you still would need some enforcement. But high penalty doesn't seem to work very well because people find ways to get around it.
Thanks. That's a great point. We've always tended to look at enforcement as a way of bringing about discipline. Even in our work, we've noticed that often the problem is with regard to infrastructure design. That is often a problem. But with that, let me move to Mr. Tuteja.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to comment. Actually, basically, if we see today, the trend is that even the tier 2 and tier 3 cities are vying for metro and they are lobbying for investment in the metros. And actually, I have worked for 37 years in Indian Railways. And I have been mostly in Mumbai. So I have seen that transportation has always been in the catch me if you can mode vis-a-vis the demand. When I started my career in the railway, we used to have about 700 to 800 services on Western Railway and about 1,000 services on Central Railway. Today we are running about almost 3,000 services both put together. Of course, I am talking of pre-COVID figures. 3,000 services on both Western and Central Railway commuter services, which commuter services which were earlier up to 60 kilometers are now extended to 120 kilometers. So what we are by investing more and more, focusing only on transportation, what we are doing is we are shifting out the middle class more and more away from the city, because the work employment centers continue to remain in the city centers. Like the BKC has become a big employment center. So only thing is it has just changed the pattern of commuting a little bit, but it has not made any major impact. Navi Mumbai was developed to act as a counter magnet, but which didn't really serve the purpose, because again the more commuting has started from Navi Mumbai to South Mumbai. So we have to really, what I think Mrs. Geetam had said very clearly, that we have to develop the satellite townships with full infrastructure, with like water supply, electricity, and also to develop them as employment centers, so as to discourage the migration to the cities. So this is one thing which I would like I wanted your comment, Mr. Agarwal, as you have been in the policy making body of the government of India. So basically, by the policy, and incidentally, when you talked of the central body regulating the investment in highways and the railways, the partitioning of the investments. So this thing has to be regulated. All these, I think, major investments are cleared by NITI Aayog, which is supposed to look into the intermodal requirements, modal transportation requirements. So I think they need to do their job in this respect. There has been definitely a competition for getting more and more investment in different sectors. So I would like just comment of Mrs. Geetam and Dr. Agarwal on this issue.
Any comments, Geetam? I'll then go to Mr. Mittal. But Geetam, any comments on this?
No, I agree. I mean, Mr. Tuteja has explained very well that these tier 2 and 3 cities are demanding metro, but it has little to do with meeting the demand. I think it is more in terms of getting more investment. And if you see the current plans also 30 kilometers in Jaipur and some small segment in any other city is not going to solve your city's transport problem. So overall, thinking about what is the vision for your city and how are you going to meet to create the infrastructure to meet that vision is really required, in which metro may play only a small role. Your development of other transport infrastructure would become much more important. I'm not saying that you completely dismiss metro, but it alone cannot solve. And the unfortunate part is that all our money is being sucked up by metro construction. That is
just one point I would like to make. Most of the metros which are come recently, like Chennai Metro and Jaipur Metro, the ridership which they have achieved today is falling much short of what was projected in the DPRs. So it means our investments are getting misdirected.
Absolutely.
No, that's absolutely right. In fact, the unfortunate thing is other cities are not learning from this experience also.
It has become like a prestigious issue for cities to get metros.
Let's move on, Mr. Tuteja. Let's not stick to only one debate. I think your point is very well taken. We tend to agree with what you're saying. Let me move to Mr. Mittal. Mr. Mittal, you had your hand raised.
Mittal can't speak his question. He sent me a written question. So
do that.
I can read it for you. He was saying some problem. So the question is, one major policy issue, multiplicity of authorities and executing agencies is prime missing link where ad hoc and silo related solutions are being followed, leading to defeat of promotion of public transport. Example, Noida Metro and DMRC have no proper connectivity. DTC buses stop at almost all places, don't have proper connectivity with metro stations. They are far away.
Laghu, would you like to take that?
I think to some extent we covered this. I think there is nothing wrong to have a multiple agency as far as execution is concerned. Okay. The bus transport agency continue to operate what they are doing, and the metro agency continue to operate the metro what they are doing. But all these agencies are supposed to achieve the common targets and the service level and level of service and the target in terms of user satisfaction, which has been provided otherwise by a common body as far as plan is concerned. So we were talking about earlier the national transportation plan. Similarly, there should be some kind of a city transportation plan. As a city, what we want to achieve? As a city, what kind of level of service, what kind of user satisfaction, degree of user satisfaction we want to give to the user of public transportation? And to deliver that, to achieve that, what are these respective organizations are supposed to do? Okay, so somewhere which I always found missing, and as rightly said, who's asking the question, that within this NCR region there are 3 metros which are not connected with each other, and somewhere being I stay in the part of the Noida, and I can understand that it is not at all connected with the Delhi metro. Similarly with the buses, but somewhere we are missing the larger point that we as all these organization, all these transit agency, we are supposed to serve the journey. Okay, while we are mostly serving the trips. Okay, and trips, and there is a big difference between the trips and journey. Okay, my trips doesn't enter the Delhi metro or in the Noida metro. My journey is from my place to my office. It may be served by the multiple modes, and somewhere that has to be understood. Unfortunately, our planning process, entire discussions, all our mostly discussions are about the technologies, okay, and which is where the user is nowhere in the center of the discussion. Unfortunately, whenever we start discussing about a transit system, we argue, our debates are about the metro versus BRT versus buses, low floor buses, high floor buses, electric buses, hydrogen buses, all those things. Somewhere in the entire discussion, the one poor person is missing is the user. Okay, what exactly is the user requirement? Okay, when we started understanding that what exactly the users just want a seamless, affordable service from one location to the other location, and how collectively all these organizations can provide that, that should be the target. Not that, okay, I have developed a fastest metro system, which I enroll my name in the Guinness Book or the Limca Book of Records, and irrespective of the future, whether I'm serving how many passenger or not, this is least further. So somewhere we are creating more and more infrastructure project rather than the transit projects.
So essentially what you're saying is no harm in having multiple executing agencies, but you must have a common plan to which they work. This is what you had highlighted earlier. And that unfortunately is what is missing here. Let me move to Mr. Gupta, Subrata Gupta. You had a few questions on the chat box also. Not able to unmute. Let me read the questions that he has got. I think I can. Those are, has he sent any questions to you, Charan?
Not send me, but I could read it from the chat box. I can read it because I thought he had a few suggestions, and I thought those are good suggestions, which were relating to, let me read it. There are 2-3 issues which need to be taken care of regarding EVs, charging point, disposal of used batteries in a way so as to avoid air and soil pollution. Can we consider alternatives for having charging centers on the highways to convert to EVs? And housing societies should have standardized charging points for members. That was one. The other was the issue that he was talking about, the how do you discipline the traffic and road rage. And then his view was that high penalty is the key way forward, because he said they did try that with drunken driving. Maybe that's the alternative to handle it. But as Professor Geetham said, probably that's not going to be very successful. So I had one question, and I'm so happy that the panel is here, and I'm sure I'll get the best answer.
Dr. Singh, can I've been able to unmute. Can I just give the suggestion which I'm trying to put forward?
Yeah.
My main suggestion was with respect to the charging points. It is true that there will be again a different kind of pollution if electric vehicles come in. I fully appreciate that point which was made, but we don't see any other option coming up to get rid of fossil fuels immediately, which can be taken up. Private parties have invested heavily in developing vehicles. I think most of us have seen that Ola and other companies are going heavily with respect to electric vehicles. But the charging point, recently I saw a news article which really shocked me, that in a city like I think Bangalore or I think Mumbai, either of the two cities, the societies were just not allowing charging centers to be stationed within the society. As a result, the person went to the extent of taking his scooter on the lift, taking it to his home to charge it in the kitchen. Now, under such circumstances, unless and until, and he says that that is the only way I could educate them, I didn't have a choice. And he had fought for this for 3 or 4 months. I'll forward that article to Dr. Singh. You can share it with others. The fact is that societies have to be pushed by some kind of a regulation so that they have charging points, which will be a general kind of a charging point for all the persons. It will be for general use. It will be a source of income also for the societies. You know, many of these housing societies don't have a source of income. It will be a source of income because whenever you charge, you pay. So that is one point which I wanted to make. Battery disposal is something which is there. The second suggestion which was there is on the highways, I would like to take a leaf out of something which we saw when we were young. I still remember with Dr. Singh, we used to stand in the post office to make a phone call for half an hour or 45 minutes, and then our turn used to come. Later on, the PCOs came. It was something where individuals are given the responsibility of manning and earning money out of a facility which was being given, a service which was being provided. The infrastructure was given in a different way, either from the telephone department or somebody. Now, similarly, on the highway, can we have charging points? Because that is something which you can use the same method where employment also will be generated. You will be able to have people who will be employed in the rural areas because they will be manning those charging centers. And the infrastructure, of course, government has to come forward, give some kind of a subsidy wherein this can be developed. These are the two suggestions which I had. And housing societies, sir, for people who are staying in their own houses, it is not a problem. Imagine a flat or a complex having 1,000 flats or 400 flats of 700 flats or something like that. You just don't have a facility of moving over to EV. You just cannot do that. So that is something which has to come as a regulation from government. Unfortunately, it's a state subject. That again brings a further issue, just like 5 departments. You have cooperation department, the 6 which has to come in, and that will be a state subject.
You can. I'm just conscious of time. That's why. No, I think your suggestions are all very good. Suggestions are all very good. I remember hearing the secretary in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs saying that they are bringing in certain amendments to the bylaws, which will sort of push charging facilities to be set up in housing locations. This example that you gave of someone taking the scooter on the lift to charge it in the kitchen, I'm not sure whether that's going to be the common thing, because with charging scooters, what is happening is those batteries are light enough for one to remove and take it up. In fact, that is what is often being recommended, that when it comes to two-wheelers, those batteries, you can just take it to your house and charge it there. You need a domestic connection for that charging. The suggestion on charging facilities on highways, I think that's also something which is an interesting idea. I tend to agree with you on that. Recently, yesterday, I think Mr. Gadkari inaugurated some new expressway, a green expressway, where they are looking for that becoming an electric expressway. So there would be charging stations there. But I think a lot of your suggestions, which are good suggestions, are being thought of already. So this is great. Now, with that, we don't have any more hand up, and I see only 5 minutes left. So can I pass it back to Charan?
I just had one question. Maybe you can let me know what would be, or maybe it is a debatable issue. I did read a few weeks back, and that is how we thought about requesting you to do this panel discussion with us. The issue that was that the government is thinking of running high-speed trains between Panipat and Delhi to bring in people from there, and Meerut and Delhi. And having lived in Bombay for a long time, my first fear was that from Churchgate to Andheri and Malad, where I used to live, there used to be one-way traffic in the morning, heavily crowded trains coming to Churchgate and trains going back totally empty, and in the evening, the vice versa. So one of my thoughts at that point, and that's what I discussed with Mr. Tuteja, and then we thought we'll have this panel discussion. Now, one thought was, is it a good idea to develop satellite towns? Like, why not make Panipat a great industrial hub? Why not make Meerut a great industrial hub? Rather than move people one side in the morning and the other side in the evening, what would be your thought? Because creating a fast moving train between these places, you have to buy land, so much of rail track has to be spread, and so much infrastructure. On the other hand, less investment would be probably used to make Panipat or make Meerut a better working station or industrial hub. What would be the global experience and what would be your suggestion in Indian context?
Okay, Charan, I'll quickly answer that because we have only 3 minutes left and we must stop at 7:30. But the quick answer is really what Geetam has already given. In the sense, we need to build up those smaller cities in the right way. We should not be building them up only as residential areas. So as you very rightly said, you need to think of economic activities even in those areas. Today, if you look at Gurgaon, for example, it is not people moving from Gurgaon to Delhi in the morning and back in the evening. You see a fair bit of reverse traffic also. So I think Delhi-Gurgaon is pretty crowded both ways. Perhaps it's not the case with Noida. But a lot depends on what kind of economic activities you create in each of these places. If we create a Mira Bhayandar in Meerut, then you'll get only one way. You'll create bedroom communities. But your point is absolutely right. We need to think of economic activities in each of these locations, which will facilitate cross movement. Ideally, I would say no movement. If it's self-contained, that would be great. But if there is a need for some kind of movement, the idea is, can there be double movement? I don't think this thinking has gone into the planning for the RRTS. The RRTS is being created as an infrastructure, but the real work will begin when we start planning for each of these hubs, how we plan for each of these hubs. Geetam, if you have a point to add on that, I have 2 minutes, but any thoughts on that?
No, that's fine. I think you have covered it well. Thanks.
So Charan, back to you. We have to end in a minute.
Thank you so much. I must thank each one of you, most importantly, Dr. Agarwal, for giving us this opportunity to listen to the experts. As you have seen, it's been a very rich discussion. I'm sure this recording, which will be available tomorrow by noon, is going to be played multiple times. We are ourselves going to send this to the Ministry of Urban Affairs because the quality of discussion has been so rich. And so I must thank each one of you, Professor Geetam, Mr. Lagu, Madam Sarika, and Dr. Agarwal. Certainly, you have put the whole team together and brought us. I was not familiar with this subject, but because these questions were being asked, so I thought, why not get the best panel? I would also like to make two other important announcements. The first one being next Friday in the evening from 9 to 10, we have Professor Barry Eichengreen from University of California, Berkeley, speaking to us on his latest book, which has been released end of August on debt. So I would invite all of you to please join and listen to Barry Eichengreen. He's, as it is, an iconic person in the economic field. Week after that, we have Professor Galina Hale, again from University of California, Santa Cruz, speaking to us, and she's been an advisor at Fed Reserve. She is speaking to us on spillovers. So another very important topic. So I would invite all of you to please, and Galina Hale will be speaking to us from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Barry Eichengreen from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Barry Eichengreen next week, and a week after is Galina Hale. And we invite all of you to please spare time and listen to them. And this is the technology which is making this possible. So once again, let me conclude by thanking Dr. Agarwal and his team to have shared these precious thoughts with us on issues with urban mobility. These, as you know, were very, very rich. And on the way, many other thoughts came. I want to thank Madam Sarika for bringing that issue up. I think it's so important. When we do inventions, we don't think how it's going to end up. Plastic is one in my mind. And when we came out with the internal combustion engines, the General Electrics, when the public transport in America was dismantled just so that private transport can gain, we never thought of global warming that will end up in. And I think it's so important that when we do an innovation, we do an invention, we think of what's the final end it could land up in. So thanks each one of you for your contribution and time. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
And see
Thanks,
you next.
Sharon. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks, my fellow panelists. Thank everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.